Let's talk about Manchester United, shall we? So United lose 3-0 at home to Tottenham. It was a calamitous performance, wasn't it? It was absolutely horrendous, and Sancho must be laughing at what he's left behind, because despite all the great new signings United have made, great signings on paper, Ten Hag signings as well, let's not forget. Erik Ten Hag's team, which we can still call them at this moment in time, are still looking as disjointed and incoherent and difficult to read as they ever have been. And the defence against Spurs just looked all over the shop, didn't it? Conceding after a couple of minutes was a shock to the system, I think, but it was in an inexcusable kind of lackadaisical attitude to Mickey van der Ven sprinting through defence in the first place that kind of left them short. And I don't know how I feel about the team now at the minute, because I hate being Ten Hag out. I've always been against being that polarising as a fan base. But this feels like a turning point for United, doesn't it? It was such a poor performance across the board. I mean, even factoring in the red card for Bruno Fernandes, which I think was deserved. I think he had the intent to take his frustration out on James Maddison. Even considering that, I think United were just woeful. Like, none of the players seemed to know their roles. None of the players seemed to know what was expected of them tactically. And there was a time where we did go down to 10 men, and United actually did look, or the players did look like they were figuring it out for themselves, and they did string passes together and start to create chances. Again, woeful in front of goal. But I am not sure now that any coaching is actually going on the training ground. It can't be. And that's really frightening, because Ineos have put their faith in Erik Ten Hag. They've given him the money and the funds that he wanted. And yet that kind of performance is still there. I don't think this will be the last performance like this if we continue with Erik Ten Hag. I really don't. But my gut feeling is I don't think he'll be there next week at the moment. I think it's too big, too bad a result, too deep of a hole, too many excuses now to kind of say that any of this is the player's fault. That team that was out there against Tottenham was probably one of the best teams we could have put out. I mean, with the exception of maybe Luke Shaw missing and Dalot being at left back, I think that was the only tweak you'd make. And yet they were made to look like a team that was about 14th in the league, which is, I think, where they are now, and deservedly so. So, yeah, something's got to give. I think Erik has to go. Maybe it's time for Ruud van Nistelrooy to step up into that manager's position and steer United out of trouble. I think it's what the fans want now. I did a Twitter poll at the end of the game when emotions were still high, and 68% of United fans wanted Ten Hag out. And I think the remaining fans that said they wanted Ten Hag in probably weren't even United fans anyway. So, yeah, it was a pretty damning verdict on Ten Hag's time at United, that it feels like that moment, that moment where a manager has played his last card and there's nowhere else for him to go. No more excuses to make. Nobody else to blame. This is all on him.
That's one of the worst halves of football I think I've seen us play, especially over the last few years. And that is a statement in itself. And you look at some of the results that we've had over the last few years. You want this manager to do well. Essentially, I think that FA Cup win at the end of last season, back end of this season, essentially saved his job. And we've come to the start of this season in a position where we need to find some consistency, put some performances and some results together. And it feels like the end of the road. Quite sad to say, because you want him to do well. It feels a bit different, I think, to previous managers. But this result is not acceptable, and the performance was awful. It's just, whenever we play bad, it's not even, okay, we didn't have a great game today. We didn't put a great performance in today. It's awful. It's terrible.